The character Dorian Gray appears in the classic novel The Picture of Dorian Gray by Irish writer Oscar Wilde, first published in 1890. The work tells the story of a young, handsome man who becomes the epitome of beauty and eternal youth. But is it truly a blessing, or merely a curse? Standing before a portrait that reflects his flawless exterior, Dorian makes a tempting bargain: to maintain his perfect appearance while every mark of time, sin, and desire manifests itself on the painting. With every indulgence in fleeting pleasures, his inner corruption deepens, yet he cannot stop. Pleasure becomes an insatiable thirst, one that only leaves him feeling emptier and more lost with each pursuit. Modern society mirrors Dorian Gray. We are caught in an endless race for fame, material wealth, and recognition. We believe that owning more and experiencing more will bring us happiness, but is that truly the case? Or are we merely trading away ourselves to chase fleeting illusions, only to be left with emptiness within? This video by Triet Tom will explore profound perspectives from philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience to uncover the true nature of pleasure. Is it a gateway to happiness, or a shackle that binds the human soul? Dorian Gray entered life as a symbol of ideal youth and beauty. But behind that radiant facade lay an invisible dread of decay. From the moment artist Basil Hallward painted his portrait, Dorian realized that youth is fleeting, beauty is ephemeral, and an unspoken fear began to creep into his mind. He wished for the impossible: to retain his perfect appearance while the portrait bore all the marks of time, sin, and desire. Initially, Dorian's life was a cascade of pleasures. He basked in admiration, indulged in lavish parties, fiery romances, and the thrill of endless conquest. Every compliment and envious glance convinced him he was the victor in the game of beauty and pleasure. But he failed to realize that pleasure is a double-edged sword. It arrives swiftly and vanishes just as quickly, leaving behind an emptiness that drives the pursuit of more. The initial satisfaction turns into addiction. Dorian becomes dissatisfied with ordinary experiences and craves ever bolder, more novel thrills. He abandons pure love with Sybil Vane, a dreamy actress, simply because the thrill of conquest has faded. He plunges into superficial relationships where power and desire reign supreme. However, no matter what he touches, the satisfaction is fleeting, leaving an ever-deepening void that nothing can fill. The marks of a debauched lifestyle never appear on Dorian's face, but the portrait grows increasingly grotesque, reflecting his true self. Each time he gazes at it, he is horrified, not by wrinkles or aging, but by the painting's exposure of his moral decay. Yet rather than stopping, he dives deeper into temptations, hoping pleasure will help him escape the reality closing in on him. Dorian Gray's story serves as a perfect metaphor for modern society. We, like Dorian, are enamored with appearances, social validation, and instant gratification. Social media has become the modern portrait, where we construct a flawless image while hiding our inner flaws. But the more we chase perfection, the more we feel lost, disconnected from our true selves. Dorian Gray never realized that pleasure is an unquenchable thirst. The more he sought it, the more he became enslaved by what he once controlled. So, is pleasure truly the key to happiness, or just a trap that keeps humanity caught in an endless cycle? Through the lens of philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience, this video will delve into the true nature of pleasure and how we can escape its grip to pursue a more balanced and meaningful life. Pleasure and happiness have been subjects of philosophical debate for thousands of years. Three prominent philosophers, Epicurus, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche, offered distinct perspectives that help us better understand the relationship between pleasure and true happiness. Epicurus believed that pleasure leads to happiness, but not through the pursuit of extravagant luxuries. He distinguished between necessary pleasures, simple needs like food, friendship, and peace of mind, and vain pleasures such as fame or power. According to Epicurus, true happiness arises from controlling desires, enjoying simplicity, and avoiding excessive indulgence. If Dorian Gray had followed this philosophy, he might have learned to appreciate modest pleasures rather than drowning in opulence. However, like many today, Dorian equated happiness with admiration, wealth, and beauty, things Epicurus warned would only bring suffering. In contrast, Arthur Schopenhauer viewed pleasure with pessimism. He believed life is an endless chain of desires. When we achieve a goal, satisfaction is fleeting, and we quickly yearn for the next. This cycle of dissatisfaction and suffering, he argued, defines human existence. Dorian Gray exemplifies Schopenhauer's philosophy. Each time he attains pleasure, from admiration to fleeting relationships, he quickly feels unfulfilled and seeks new thrills. Instead of finding happiness, Dorian grows emptier, mirroring how modern people endlessly pursue material success and recognition without ever feeling truly content. Schopenhauer suggested that the only way to escape this cycle is to reduce desires and accept life as it is. Yet, this is a path many are unwilling to take. Nietzsche, on the other hand, did not dismiss pleasure, but saw it not as the ultimate goal, but as a tool for self-development. For Nietzsche, higher pleasures, those born from creativity, willpower, and striving for greatness, are the path to true fulfillment. According to Nietzsche, the pursuit of pleasure should not enslave us. Instead, it should challenge us to grow, overcome limitations, and achieve a higher state of being. If Dorian Gray had lived according to Nietzsche's philosophy, he would not have been obsessed with external validation, but would have sought true value from within. However, instead of using pleasure for personal growth, Dorian allowed it to control him, turning into someone dependent on desire and the admiration of others. In today's society, Nietzsche reminds us that success and happiness are not found in indulgence, but in becoming the best version of ourselves. From these three perspectives, it is clear that, without control, pleasure can become a prison, trapping individuals in a cycle of dissatisfaction and meaninglessness. Epicurus teaches us to seek happiness through simplicity. Schopenhauer warns of the endless cycle of desire, while Nietzsche encourages transforming pleasure into a motivation for self-improvement. Dorian Gray offers a clear lesson on losing control of pleasure. He let it dominate his life, chasing after vanity, and eventually realized that pleasure is never enough. Like Dorian, we might be inadvertently binding ourselves in an endless race for pleasure, without even realizing it. Through the story of Dorian Gray and classical philosophies, we can derive valuable lessons for today's life. First, enjoy pleasure with mindfulness, appreciate the small moments, and find joy in simplicity. Second, reduce desire, learn to be content, and accept the present, instead of endlessly pursuing distant goals. Third, aim for lasting value. Pleasure is merely a means, not the end. Seek growth and meaning in life. From philosophical perspectives, we see that pleasure can be a subtle trap. But what makes people unable to resist the allure of pleasure? To understand this more, let's examine it from a psychological perspective. Pleasure is not just a feeling, but an integral part of the human psyche. Since ancient times, the brain has been programmed to seek and respond to pleasure as a survival mechanism. However, in the modern world, where pleasure can be easily attained with little effort, people fall into an endless cycle of craving, never feeling satisfied. Dorian Gray is a perfect example of losing control to pleasure. At first, the joy of admiration and love was enough to satisfy him, but over time, that satisfaction faded. Dorian no longer felt happy with what he had. He yearned for more, deeper relationships, more intense experiences, and endless praise. Why do we always feel lacking, even when we've achieved much? The human brain operates on a powerful reward system, with dopamine as the key element. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a role in driving us to seek pleasure and rewards. When we achieve a small success, the brain releases dopamine, creating a feeling of exhilaration and motivating us to keep acting in pursuit of more. The problem arises when people become dependent on this mechanism. Like Dorian Gray, when we get used to previous accomplishments, we no longer feel satisfied with the same level of pleasure. This phenomenon is called hedonic adaptation, meaning what once brought us joy gradually becomes normal, and we start craving something more intense. In today's life, this is clearer than ever. Social media is a prime example. Every like, every compliment initially brings a thrill, but then we feel empty and need more to continue satisfying ourselves. We get trapped in the dopamine loop, where pleasure is never enough. And there are many stories of people, from the wealthy to the ultra-wealthy, falling into this vanity trap. According to the social comparison theory by psychologist Leon Festinger, humans tend to measure their self-worth by comparing themselves to others. In the case of Dorian Gray, his obsession with pleasure not only came from within, but also from the pressures of the upper-class society, where everyone craved perfection, wealth, and status. Dorian wanted not only to retain his beauty, but also to capture all the pleasures that others might dream of. We see the perfect lives of others, luxurious vacations, fulfilling relationships, dazzling successes, and wonder if we are missing out on something. This comparison creates invisible pressure, forcing us to continue seeking pleasure to prove our worth. One of Dorian Gray's greatest tragedies is the loss of his ability to love genuinely. At first, he loved Sybil Vane with pure enthusiasm, but the pleasure from love gradually dulled, and he began seeking new relationships to replace the initial excitement. This reflects a common psychological reality. When people are dissatisfied with a long-term relationship, they tend to look for novelty outside, leading to an endless cycle of desire. Many psychological studies show that pleasure in relationships is not solely dependent on initial feelings, but also on nurturing and long-term development. However, people today, like Dorian, often overlook this and focus only on immediate pleasure. So, how can we break the pleasure cycle? Psychology offers several methods to control the need for pleasure and find more sustainable satisfaction. Some solutions include practicing mindfulness, learning to appreciate the present moment, rather than always focusing on what's yet to be achieved, slowing down and savoring the small joys of life as the key to escaping the endless cycle of pleasure. Limiting exposure to constant stimuli, reducing time spent on social media, and cutting back on information overload can help focus on true self-worth. Redefine success. Instead of measuring success by material wealth and social status, aim for inner peace and long-lasting spiritual values. Build genuine relationships. Seek and maintain meaningful relationships rather than those that merely fulfill temporary pleasure needs. Set personal boundaries. Learn to say no to temptations and control your desires, so as not to be swept into the spiral of immediate gratification. We must learn to master our desires, seek fulfillment from true values, rather than being led by pleasure. Remember, pleasure is part of life, but it is not all of life. From a neuroscience perspective, you will gain a deeper understanding of how the brain controls pleasure and why we are so easily caught in an endless loop. As we know, the human brain operates on a reward system, with dopamine playing a key role. This mechanism prevents people from ever truly feeling satisfied with what they have. Imagine when you first enjoy a favorite dish. The taste satisfies you completely. But over time, as you eat that dish more often, the initial excitement fades, and you begin searching for new flavors to stimulate your taste buds. This is how the brain gets caught in an endless spiral, just like Dorian Gray never feeling enough with his beauty and society's admiration. Similarly, those addicted to substances fall into this loop. Initially, they only need a small dose to feel exhilarated, but gradually, that dose is no longer enough to provide the same feeling, forcing them to increase consumption. As a result, they become slaves to an uncontrollable craving, and their lives spiral into stagnation and collapse. When people abuse pleasure, the brain gradually becomes dependent and forms neural pathways, leading them to return to behaviors that provide satisfaction, even though they know they can be harmful. This explains why many people can't break free from the habit of constantly scrolling through social media, over-shopping, or seeking validation from others. Frequent exposure to such intense stimuli can diminish the ability to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, leading to emotional emptiness and stagnation. Just like Dorian Gray became increasingly dependent on indulgent pleasures, modern humans also fall into a loop of pleasure they cannot escape. To control pleasure and regain balance, Triet Tom recommends practicing a popular method called dopamine detox, which involves temporarily abstaining from high-pleasure stimuli such as social media, excessive consumption, or activities that constantly stimulate dopamine. When the brain is reset, it becomes more sensitive to the small joys in life, such as reading, taking a walk, or enjoying peaceful moments. In today's world, it is not about completely eliminating pleasure, but learning to master it, savor the simple things, and pursue more sustainable values. The story of Dorian Gray is not just a literary work, but a powerful reminder of the nature of pleasure and the human desire for endless fulfillment. From philosophical, psychological, and neuroscientific perspectives, we have discovered that while pleasure is an essential part of life, it can become a double-edged sword if not controlled properly. Dorian Gray chose pleasure as his guiding principle, believing it would bring happiness and immortality. But the more he pursued it, the deeper he sank into the abyss of emptiness. Like Dorian, modern humans are also caught in the whirlpool of immediate pleasure, chasing superficial values like beauty, fame, and wealth, as well as fleeting pleasures such as social media, shopping, and transient relationships. The result is a life filled with brief moments of satisfaction, but lacking true peace and contentment. Cultivating mental independence and focusing on inner values will help us break free from this dependency. Ask yourself, what truly brings lasting value to your life? Instead of letting pleasure dominate, guide your life with enduring values like love, dedication, and self-development. Always remember to practice mindfulness so you can stop before being drawn into temporary temptations. It also helps you appreciate the present moment, rather than always chasing distant futures. If pleasure is viewed as a tool to experience and enrich life, it will become a positive part of the journey toward growth. But if it controls and leads you, pleasure will turn into an invisible prison, trapping you in a cycle of scarcity and dissatisfaction. Take time to reflect and make small changes, such as enjoying everyday moments, building sincere relationships, and living with purpose. Don't let pleasure control you. Master it, and direct it toward the path of lasting happiness. Dorian Gray's story ends in tragedy, but your life does not have to be the same. Be mindful of temptations, seek true values, and live a fulfilling life. Happiness is not the destination, but the journey you can start choosing right now. Thank you for accompanying Wisdom in Life. Wishing you and your family much health.